Game marks.
There's nothing wrong with you liking ponies. You liking ponies, that's a strange and odd thing.
Hey, welcome to a special showing, the Game Marks crew here. So this is a recap of our recent Let's Play that we did through on Link to the Past.
Kerfluffle.
So, if you've not watched any of our recaps before, just know that, for obvious reasons, spoilers, like, if you're not wanting to be spoiled on anything Link, Zelda, or Link to the Past, we may even spoil other Zelda games on this in context. I mean, it's an
Other Zelda games?
no holds barred.
Blasphemy!
Why, isn't it terrible that Nintendo never made another Zelda game after Link to the Past? Isn't that just horrible and unfortunate?
So, here's, okay.
No.
So I was playing it, I was the new one too, it had never played it before. And, of course, now I'm playing it now, not back then. And my overall takeaway impression, and this is kind of funny, was at finishing it up and wrapping that of like trying to decide if I think Link to the Past works today, or if it's nostalgia. Like if that game,
I can totally see
like
that.
if you were to make a new Link to the Past, would it work again? And then, of course, like, Nintendo is doing exactly that. They're making a Link to the Past 2.
But even the videos I've seen of that don't feel like Link to the Past felt like a natural evolution of the original Zelda.
Yes.
And
everything that I think... So, okay, after playing all of it, I really think that, in a broad stroke, everything that I can attribute to Legend of Zelda, original NES, and that other people attribute in Link to the Past and things like that. It's like, oh, this is the best, or this is the great, this is the highlight.
yeah.
Is really a matter of what you played first and where you were at when you played that. Because I think really core, they are the same game. With just implementations of technology.
Well, I actually played the original Zelda first. It was just, I guess, when I played it. And I guess I can see, like, how someone would go on to play like Ocarina of Time or whatever. I've never played it. I don't think
It was fun.
Yeah. But I can see how someone maybe a generation younger than us plays that and like that's their frame of reference where we're like, I don't understand.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it works. And see, the things that it lacks in modern video games. Like, for one, there's no story. There's actually by today's standards, there's no story. Link, save Hyrule. Why? Because reasons.
I actually
like that's the whole plot.
I actually like that about when Link to the Past first came out. That was the first one where they tried to impose some sort of continuity, like this is Link's ancestor, and I was like, I don't know, man, that sounds kind of crazy. I'm cool with Zelda 1 and 2 that don't really have any connection.
But I know Nintendo's come out and said like there are connections and all that.
Yeah, the Hyrule
like
Historia.
Like, I load up Twilight Princess.
And that's a great thing.
It is a great game. I love Twilight Princess. I do think that's one of the better Zelda games. Having played 4 Zelda games now, and those being Zelda, Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening, A Link to the Past.
Wait, you haven't played Zelda 2? Adventure of Link?
Is that Link's Awakening?
No, that's Adventure of Link.
Adventure of Link,
Yeah.
whatever. Link's adolescent rise, or his maturity, or Link's
Link's never getting
becoming a male elf, becoming a real elf.
Link is never getting any.
Then
but that's part of it.
Link to the Past, and then Twilight Princess. And I popped in a little bit and played a little bit of Skyward Sword. It didn't hook me and grab me to the Link, but I might come back to it because I have heard it does have a payoff if you stick with it and get into it.
I don't know. I couldn't get past some of it. But anyway, the point...
I generally, like, that aside, Twilight Princess, I think, holds up as a good game, period. Just
yes. No, I do care about, like,
but I don't
3D
feel
Zeldas.
It, like, hooking in to like, I don't feel a cohesion.
Well,
of,
that's...
like, this is a Zelda game, Like, it's almost like, oh, this is a standalone game, and this could have been anything and still been good. What makes it a Zelda game is, like, it's a little cutesy in the art style.
It's the world.
And you kind of collect some rupees, and you're putting together, you know...
I feel like Link to the Past, I do, and again, when I played it, I was in my teens, so, you know, again, it has to do a lot with timing. But it was the fact that there were certain little story threads that kind of, like, you know, the boy who's lost in the woods and gives you the flute, like, you're kind of meant to feel something about the Dark World.
Well, yeah, I don't know that I took away anything from it like that, because I took away, like, the boy and the flute as just being, like, here's a puzzle, and this is your clue.
Yeah, but and a lot of it, too, was I read the Nintendo Power comics, so I'm pulling a lot of that in. But I do think you're right about there's not supposed to be a lot of continuity, and there's not a lot of IPs that could get away with that the way Zelda did. And to some extent Mario and Metroid and a lot of the other Nintendo IPs that are classics.
Now, what makes a Zelda game, though, is this very mechanical-based formula that, you know, they set with the Legend of Zelda, the original one.
Yeah.
And for most of the games, they don't deviate through too much. Like, you know...
They always throw in like a twist. Like the Light World, Dark World.
Yeah, it's a Light World, Dark World. And again, that's Twilight Princess, too.
Yeah.
But they throw in a twist, or they throw in, you know, the hook shot becomes a thing, or something like that. They throw in a mechanic to the system, but it is a collection of mechanics. I mean, really, it's a linear progression through the game. It has an open world feel, but it is a linear progression.
Well, it forces you to explore to figure out the next step.
To find out, you know, where the dungeon locations are, but you can't really do too many of the dungeons out of order in any of the games.
Yeah, and it feels kind of Metroid-y, because you know you are not going to get to that place right there because you're not in that part of the story yet.
Yeah. It's got the feeling of exploration without actually being an exploration game. Like, it gives you that in kind of a false... premise.
Well, there is sort of a lore,
exploring, but you're really not.
There's kind of this secret knowledge that, especially like when you're a kid and you're playing, it's like, oh, hey, do you know where that dungeon is, or something like that. Kind of helps with, like, you know, if you're also reading Nintendo Power, there is kind of this lore that goes along with that. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, so yeah, it has a set of mechanics. It has the items, you know, this inventory system. I did become very important to, you know, items and items allowing access and powering these items up. You know, that there's no stat progression. There's an item progression for advancing your character. Of course, collecting life. So as you go on throughout the game, you get more life. Of course, enemy difficulty ramps up, but it does seem like there is a good power curve there of, yes, you meet some new enemies, but some of them aren't doing hardly any damage to you compared to how many hearts you have. But then you walk in, and it's like, you know, like Dark Nuts. Like, all of a sudden, like, these guys are taking out, like, half your health in one hit, and you're like, oh my god, I have, like, 8 hearts, but they still knock out, like, 4 a hit. This is bullshit, you know? So, I mean, they still play that power curve, I think, fairly well. However, I've always felt like, and we definitely did this in Link to the Past, definitely that's playthrough, is, like, doing the I know the game playthrough.
Yes.
So, like, if you know the secret, if you know the place to go, if you know there's a heart here, you can get the Master Sword one dungeon early. It seems like, you know, you can always get something one dungeon early before you're kind of required to have it. So if you keep up with the one dungeon early thing, you can have a much easier playthrough than if, like my initial playthrough, I wouldn't have known about many of these things. So some of the dungeons I would have been walking through at equipment level, which would have been a level of difficulty, but some of them I would have been a level behind. It would have been actually like, do I have to fail a bunch so I get frustrated to go to the overworld to then find, like, oh, I gotta throw some shit in the lake.
Actually, Link to the Past I've found does that a lot more because there's, you know, the bottles, there's the magic spells, there's even a couple of items on Death Mountain, like I want to say the cape is there, or one of the canes.
Yeah. I mean, there was stuff we didn't actually get.
Yeah.
And finish the game still, and then we didn't actually get it. It does... I mean, and I'm going to have, again, I've already stated this, I'm going to have a bias this entire review.
Oh, yeah, no,
because I'm going to bias the NES Zelda over the SNES Zelda because of this. And I think it has to do more with the order and the times in which I played them and my context. But it feels like Link to the Past was overcomplicated. Like, it was like, let's do this thing that worked, right? It almost feels like, okay, we did this Legend of Zelda, and then we did the Link's
Adventure of Link.
Adventures of Link. We did this other Link quest, and we kind of switched it up. Combat was a side scroller.
Switched it up a lot. They tested out a lot of concepts,
map,
really.
They had random encounters. You know, they basically, like, danced toward a Final Fantasy, right? They grabbed elements going on in the other role-playing games from Japan. It seems wrong to call it a JRPG when they're both fucking Japanese role-playing games. That's where they came from. But the more what we would call a JRPG now, they went down that road, and then they said, okay, we're going to do this new one on the Super Nintendo, but let's go back to the other one. And they were like, okay, what worked here? Okay, do a bunch more of everything that worked.
They threw in some concepts like magic and things like that they used in 2. They
had magic in 1.
They had the wand and they had the book, but they didn't have like a magic meter.
The candle had like a magic.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you didn't have a magic meter.
And one of the other things I noticed in 2 or in 3 or Link to the Past, like you get a lot of items. There are a few items in 1 that you actually have to grind for to a certain extent. So, I mean...
In 1, what are you grinding for?
Well, the shield, like the shield, okay. The food that you have to buy to get through one of the levels is... So...
I guess, so at the time I played it, it didn't feel grindy.
No, I mean, it may just be me going back and playing it.
What do I know about grinding?
Yeah.
And now it doesn't feel grindy because I'm always walking around with like 255 gold, like constantly.
Yeah.
Now, and again, I don't know if it was because you knew a lot of the tricks, and again, you just did the same thing that I do in a NES playthrough.
Yeah.
You did with me on Link to the Past, but you're only walking around with too much money.
Yeah.
You know, like, money was insane.
And I remember when I first played it as a kid, it was the opposite. I was like, oh man, I'm going to have to go kill creatures because I need that 100 rupees so I can buy a bottle.
Right. Yeah. And again, I think that just goes into the, like, if you know the hints, you can coast at a much higher level and have, you know, like a much easier playthrough. If you know where the secrets are and all of that, you always have money, you're flush with cash. And if you don't, you can have a much more struggling experience. I know I'm definitely, as the girls play Legend of Zelda, I'm allowing them to kind of experience it a little bit, but then I am like, okay, after a few minutes of that, I'm like, alright, go here and burn these bushes, and you'll find the guy with the 30 coins, and you can just get the item now.
Yeah.
If you got yourself within 30 coins, and we need 250, you know? But we did grind early, I did have him grind early for the ring, because I knew, like, the damage ring would pay big dividends for them.
Yeah.
Right? Because that would reduce their damage, making it an easier time, as soon as they got the bracelet and then they could, do things.
I definitely feel like, I think all 3 of those that we've, you know, Legend of Zelda, Adventure of Link, Link to the Past are all, like, classic games, but I am looking through rose-colored glasses at all of them.
Yeah, so that's what I come back to. Of like, this is the lasting impression that I left with as a game designer, and who loves Legend of Zelda and would love to take another stab at redoing this game. And also, as my daughters have played the original Legend of Zelda, I want to do it even more now because you know, there's a point in playing Legend of Zelda where my oldest basically asked, like, "Why is this called Legend of Zelda? Link does everything." And I'm like, because games.
Because games
hate girls. And
it should either be Zelda doing everything or it should be called Legend of Link.
Yeah, I mean, it ties into the news story of the one girl and her boyfriend who switched the art so you play as Zelda rescuing Link.
Yeah.
But she played the entire game as a girl, like, just assumed that you were playing Zelda. Until, like, the end, and then kind of realized, like, oh, I wasn't playing the badass princess out to save her kingdom, you know? But, you know, again, like, because of the graphics, you could easily see that, right?
Yeah.
She just didn't, like, equate, like, Link with the name of a character, right? And it doesn't come up that much. But, you know, and again, being young, you could easily make that assumption and not realize, they're not talking about you when they talk about Zelda in the first one. So I just come back to that of, like, you know, some of the ideas I've had for games, involving, you know, princesses and things like that I've had discussions with my daughters about that have become game ideas that I've written down and made notes on of, like, how that could apply to this kind of thing. And after reading finishing the, Gender Inclusive Game Design book, excellent fucking book, by the way. Excellent fucking book. I think one of the best books I've read on game design in general. Like, forget the gender thing, which is obviously making a strong case for. But the stuff that it lies out of, like, how to make a gender-inclusive game is you just make a better game design. Like, every design they take is always enhanced, and then it's always like, I want to play that game. You know, more than the original game that was pitched. That sounds more interesting.
I think
So,
Zelda...
like, I've got those ideas of, like, what would make Legend of Zelda, which also my daughters appear to be adapting to quite well. They really seem to be enjoying it. So I don't want to say it's like this is a male game. But it does make a lot of the male tropes are in it.
Yeah.
It kind of gets a pass because of the age of the game.
Honestly, it's not the main point. Like, you're collecting Triforce, but it's not to save Zelda, it's to save the kingdom. It's not like Mario where, like, oh, our princess is in another castle. You're like, oh yeah, there's a princess in this.
Well,
at the very
but
end.
it goes beyond that. So reading the book and understanding some of the psychology studies and things like that, there's a greater discord feeling, a feeling of uncomfort and a feeling of out of place for a girl or a woman playing a male character than there is for a male character playing a female character. And it was surprising to kind of read this in the book, but they were just kind of laying it out there, and they were just like, it's a patriarchal society. And if you are the CEO of a company, okay, and you have to do the job of the janitor one day, whatever, you do it. You can go down a station, right?
Because you always know you're...
Well, you're not only that, but
up.
you kind of know what's expected every social rung below you, right? So it's not just knowing the job, and it's not knowing you can go back, right? You could even be demoted, and you would still be okay, like demoted, because you know what's expected of you by society at that rung. But if you're a janitor or if you're an assistant, and then you get thrust into the CEO role, people stress out and they wig out because they don't understand what society wants of them. They don't know how to act. They're above their station now. And it's like, I don't know what was done. One of the examples they talk about in the book was a story of a family moving to India. You know, the guy gets a job in programming in India and all that, and so the wife's at home and all that, and then she has yard workers coming in and taking care of the yard and landscaping and things like that. And they go in the back alley behind the house and just pee into the sewer directly, right? Just like talking to the housemaids and things like that. It's like, why won't they, they could just come in. It's like, oh, that's not accepted. It's like, oh, screw that. I'm American. Like, this is just bullshit. You shouldn't have to go to the restroom in the alley. Bathroom, perfectly fine. And so she tells them, and they don't want to go in, I don't want to go in. And she just basically tells them they need, like, no, you come in, you come in. So finally they do because, she's telling them. But then found out what they were doing was when they would just walk in, go into the bathroom, stand there for 6 minutes, touch nothing, and walk out. Because they were uncomfortable. This was not their station in society. They don't know what's wrong. They don't know if they touch the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, they're going to get in trouble. And so they freak out and become paralyzed. And the point is that because of the gender bias in society at large, many women grow up with problems imagining themselves as the CEO, as in charge. And then when you put them in a male character, those kind of bubble up. And so what it results in is like a woman is more uncomfortable playing a man than a man is playing a woman. Not saying that some men are uncomfortable playing women. I'm not saying that some men are too comfortable playing women.
Well, just in general,
back
like,
and forth
there's more of a chance of this.
Character. So even though something is innocent in Legend of Zelda or Mario, it's like, oh, but I don't want to play as a man. And then it can manifest as other ways too, and I've seen this with my girls. If there's a female choice, they will pick the female choice, but what happens is the female choice is tied to a class. So like the female is the archer, or the female is the thief. And it's like, well, that's really the soldier's kind of the easy level character they should start with. But that's a male. So they always play, I mean, they did this with Dungeon Defenders. They would only play the female archer on Dungeon Defenders, and she's a hard character to play. She's like the third hardest character in the game to play, or I mean the second hardest to play, but of the launch characters, with the monk being the first hardest, right? So those kind of bias. So anyway, reading that has given me ideas of like, okay, I see these things, you've kind of laid these things out, and you've kind of given a tool set for like how to adjust them, and I'm like, man, I really would love to remake Legend of Zelda, and now that I know these things that would make it more inclusive, but I'm not so worried about the more inclusive part. I mean, I am.
Yeah,
because I have daughters.
But
it's also like, these sound
I could make
like
it
better games. Like, I could take and do some better things in a modern Zelda, but I start wondering with, like, the formula, does it work? You know, like, it leaves so much out that it's become modern games that it's like, could you sit down and honestly enjoy a brand new Legend of Zelda? Would you enjoy, like you said, grinding for those coins again?
Well, I think if you know, especially if you knew, if you had a good understanding of like several Zelda games, and you could pick and choose what you liked, which ones did what well, I think you almost run into the problem that if you remove Link and Zelda and Hyrule, you don't have, like, it doesn't leave you with the same feeling. You can get down all of the mechanics. Well, whether you'll get the level and world and dungeon design.
That's what I mean. If you can't do a Zelda game today without Link and Zelda and the Triforce and Hyrule, if you take out the window dressing and you leave the mechanics and you replace them with other names and actors or whatever, and it doesn't work, then it's like saying no. Like, Zelda is riding on nostalgia. And Zelda is riding on an IP, but Zelda is not riding on its mechanics.
I don't think it's...
I don't the gameplay. That's not why people play Legend of Zelda's games anymore.
I don't necessarily know that that's the case. I think it's just going to be a harder sell than... It doesn't sell itself immediately, especially because, like I said, a lot of the value in early Zelda games is having that knowledge. Like, having that shared lore of... Here's where, you know, all the dungeons are. It is also
shared lore. It is not lore in the game. So it's not something... You may get a hint or two, but I mean, some of this stuff, Nintendo Power or a friend told you. It was not something you were just going to stumble into.
But I think every new Zelda game gets extra points because it is a Zelda game, not because, you know, like it gets extra attention. You give it a little... Kind of like Final Fantasy games.
I mean, even in Link to the Past... There were spots to bomb that had no markings on the map that they were bombable.
Yep.
You know? So there's no indication in game that this area might do something that you want to explore.
I guess what I'm trying to say is not necessarily that Zelda doesn't hold up, but it's that there's a lot of games nowadays that I think have a claim to its legacy as being like the next Zelda.
Well,
and haven't really.
At that point, you're not doing Zelda. Like when I say like redoing a modern Zelda, I basically mean adhering pretty faithfully to the classic recipe, not the Darksiders of like, oh, we have a hook shot and you know we have Z targeting.
Well, I'm thinking more stuff like Evil Quest, and I'm sure there's more if I actually dug into Steam and a lot more of the indie games that are out there. I'd find more examples of that, because I think it is a touchstone with a lot of people like us who see it and go like, every time you play it, it's like, it's not overly complicated. I'd really love to make that. So,
well, I mean, there's a love for making, but again, is it is that enough for a game now? You know, I mean, it got to the point where that's only going to appeal to a niche, and that niche is really going to be a nostalgic niche that's going to be like, oh man, this is just like, you know, that Legend of Zelda, and I get one more scratch at that nostalgic itch. That's the question I'm asking here, of like, if you, and it's going to be kind of answered, because they're doing a straight up Link to the Past 2. Game style and everything.
Yeah.
Now, if Nintendo launches it, and it's like, it's got the art assets, but there's cutscenes, and there's huge dialogue, and backstory, and all of that, it's like, okay, well, you guys obviously didn't do a sequel, you did a cash-in on the brand name, right? Well,
Nintendo, like I said, Nintendo is in a really weird position where they've got all these IPs that survive on very little continuity, generally a silent protagonist. Like, you saw what happened with Metroid Other M when they tried to give Samus more of a story.
Yeah.
If Link ever talked,
all bets are off.
Yeah, like, it's gonna be...
right now, all he goes is, eh?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
it's gonna be like the CDI, remember that?
I think, though, like, for your point, though, like, to me, like, the Mario series is kind of dead. Like, Mario's a platformer. Like, there's no innovation you can do there that makes platforming fun anymore. You know what I mean? Like, I'm on a platform, I'm gonna get from the start to the beginning, I'm gonna jump on some shit that moves, and dodge some shit with spikes, and collect some coins between here and there. It seems like what you did in Super Mario Bros. 3 is really kind of the peak.
Yeah. Or world, depending on how you view it. There's some people who are like...
Yeah.
I prefer 3, but it's for different reasons.
Yeah, you could... Again, I think it's more of a age than it is a commentary between the two games.
Well, there are slight differences.
I haven't felt like since that time frame, though, anything in definitely the Wii era and forward, they have done anything, even really on the DS, that's like got me to play a Mario game beyond like a level or two. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, there's pipes again. Cool, I get big. Oh, look, now I get really big. Okay, I get really big. That's funny. You know, it's like, it just doesn't feel like that has an age. So like when we're talking about like Legend of Zelda, it's like, is it at that point of like, it's not enough just to have a coin collecting platform. Because then you do look at the indie games, right? Then you look at the indie games that are straight up old school platformers, right? They are jumping around, collecting coins. Some of them have modern conveniences such as wall jumping and double jump and things like that, and some don't. I don't care, man. You gotta have a hook. You gotta be insane. Like the last platformer, I guess you could say I played, was They Bleed Pixels, and that's an extremely hard as fun game, and also with the whole, like, H.P. Lovecraft weird story thing that they're showing in cutscenes, and I just really want to know what kind of happened to get through all of those, and wild art style, you know?
Yeah.
So, like, had all of those things going for it to make me want to play a platformer.
I think the interesting thing, and this is not so much with games like Mario or, to a certain extent, Metroid. They're kind of on either side of this, but I think with Zelda is you want, for a game like that to work, you have to have a hook. You have to have something that you do slightly different, but it can't be so much of a hook that you overshadow or break the rest of the mechanics. Because the point of Zelda isn't guy with a sword, it's guy with a sword who collects items, and like there's all these different things going on, and those items open up other areas. So anyway,
I guess my thinking to what I think I'm going to do, if I get involved and I start trying to make this remake, this homage, basically, because it wouldn't be a remake, but this inspired Zelda game, modern, based on some of the conversations I have with my daughters and game ideas that we've gone through. Is to focus and highlight more the puzzle aspect of the Zelda games.
Yeah.
Which have stayed extremely simple, really. Like, they're all like, this block pushes and then that door reveals, things like that. There's never, like, a more involved puzzle of, like, okay, I'm gonna come to this room, there's all these weird runes and colors that I can move around.
Yes.
I'm gonna have to leave and come back when I know what those runes are and the pattern that I'm trying to do, right? It never gets that complex. Everything can be solved within the same room. So I think where the middle ground is that it's a more complex puzzle that can still be solved within the same room.
Yes.
Right? Like, everything is in this room to solve it, to look around and figure it out, but it's more than just push one block and reveal the staircase. Now it's going to be like a combination. There was a little bit of this more in Link to the Past. There was a couple push block puzzles that were like, think about the order, but they were never like extreme. They were like 2 or 3 blocks and then you were done.
Yeah. Well, it didn't, like, you couldn't, it was very hard to fail out of a puzzle. There were a couple of dungeons, especially in Link to the Past, where if you screwed up, you'd have to take the long way around. But
for the most part, you just walk in and out the room and reset it, and you're
yeah.
good. There also was never really puzzles that introduced a new mechanic. There was never an experimental puzzle where you have to go like, okay, wait a minute, there's this thing. So what happens if I do this?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, it bounces. All right, so that thing bounces. I know that bounces now. Let me go, what does this thing do? Oh, it turns on when something bounces on it. Okay, well, obviously I'm going to bounce this on that, but how do I get that over there?
It was basically crafting a really good experience instead of, here's something new. It was less ADD, I guess, if you want to. Yeah. And I think it also, like, you also have to have a reason. You have to have a world that's well developed thematically, but not necessarily, like, filled with people and busy and, like, there are 8 dungeons. You have to figure out where they are, and how to get to them. And they're not in a nice laid out order.
But to Zelda's credit as a game, and I granted this is an instruction manual that kind of guides you to the first dungeon. If you just pop it in and you start playing it, it does a good job of unfolding that, though.
Yes.
I mean, you start out without even the sword. And you kind of go get there and you collect the sword. And then it's like, I got a sword. I want to hit shit now. Because I got a sword. I didn't start out with it. If you start out with a sword, you don't have the desire to want to hit shit with the sword as much because you didn't earn the sword. And granted, earning the sword was just like, okay, I can walk around, I'll walk in this little black cave, and, ooh, it gave me a sword. I discovered the sword. It's a very small victory. But I think they did that right. So I think that is something you might want to keep going forward, of just throwing it in with no explanation.
But
no
allowing...
tutorial and also the ability to, like, completely go in the wrong direction for a while and just fuck up for a bit.
Well, actually...
I'm not going to guide you. I'm not going to Final Fantasy 13 you and make you play down this track for, like, 20-something hours.
I think the idea is that it's not an open world game, but you let the player control how they experience the game. There's never, like, there's never in Zelda, in the original Zelda, and there's very rarely in Link to the Past a moment where you're like, well, as soon as I do this, I've lost control, I'm stuck in this small confined area, like, I've begun this plot segment that it's going to take me a while before I get back to the the real world to do. You're always in control, and that's what I mean. You have to maintain that so that you have to visit all the dungeons in order, but there's not like a moment between Dungeon 4 and Dungeon 5 where you're whisked away and have to escape before you can do something else.
Yeah. So, yes, that's kind of my take on it. I mean, as playing it, I felt, it was a pretty good game. It deserves what it gets. The praise that it gets, and the people who like the game. I'm not taking anything from it. I don't think I will ever feel the need to pop that in and play it again, where I could always pop in and play some Legend of Zelda. Like, it doesn't grab me that, but I just have to say that's a time and place thing.
Yeah. I don't know.
When you played each one of those, might dictate more of where you are as far as like what you want to replay.
I don't know. Like I said, I've played Link to the Past like last year sometime. I'm right now switching out between Zelda 2 and the original Zelda, and it's like all of them hit different notes of nostalgia for me, and there's things I like about each of them, so I can definitely see. I definitely have a reason to go back and play both of them.
Well, I think that you and I...
Not anytime
cool.
soon.
Not anytime soon, no, but it'd be kind of cool for you and I to sit down and play the second Zelda 2.
Yes.
Because both of you, we both like that game, not necessarily as Zelda canon, but like as a game separate on itself. It was a pretty cool game and had some pretty cool mechanics about it.
We will need to refer to walkthroughs, because I remember so much about that game, and yet...
I mean, I finished it.
Yeah.
And I almost don't want to dive into it and just, like, try to remember a bit of what we...
You won't need them for a while, but you will at some point need walkthroughs.
I do know, like, the one time I popped it in and then go, like, oh, fuck, that's right. You have to learn how to upstab and downstab. Because what I remember is, like, once you get downstab, like, a ton of this shit gets a whole lot easier, because you can just bounce on shit. Either bounce over it, or just bounce on it and kill it.
There's some stuff, especially on the world map, that is not at all clear how you get from point A to point B. And because of random encounters, it's just a hassle. Yeah. And in some cases, there's misdirection, but that is another topic for another time.
Yeah, so... Alright, everyone, thanks for tuning in and checking out our recap. If you've got any comments, of course, just leave them below. On any Link to the Past.